Hi, it's Thursday, May 30th, 2019, and this is the Pro and Con Show, and I'm your host, Michael James Ott. So, if you've been looking at these videos over the last days, you know we try to separate the wheat from the chaff. In other words, try to look at some of the bias out there and try to figure out how to get around it. And so I've said in the past, focus on the who, the what, the where, the when, and leave a lot of analysis and opinion out of it. And so, I look at 5 different websites, some of them left-leaning, some of them right-leaning, and one kind of seemingly mostly unbiased, that's NPR, National Public Radio. And one of my favorites to look at, by the way, because of that reason, and I would encourage you to get a lot of your news from them if you're willing to do so. Now, there's Robert Mueller had his less than 10-minute statement yesterday, and so there's, of course, the Trump administration, Mr. Trump himself, and the Trump administration, the Attorney General, Mr. Barr, and so on, are now reacting, I guess is the best word to use, now reacting to his statement, and kind of the additional clarity. I mean, I don't think that Mr. Mueller really feels like he provided additional clarity, but I think a lot of people feel that he did in his, like I say, it was like 9 minutes and 40 seconds or 9 minutes and 45 seconds or something like that yesterday on national television. So I want to, rather than get into that, which, basically they're just saying, well, you can, it's a lot of what he said, it's a lot of the same arguments they've been making for a couple months now, since Mueller gave his report to Mr. Barr, and then Mr. Barr provided a summary, which certainly seems like it was biased inappropriately. And then, now Mr. Mueller, formally saying in a press statement that this is really what he meant, and being more concise. And I think the main thing is that there is absolute consensus that that there was an attempt, a fairly broad and widespread spread attempt by the Russians to interfere with the election in 2016. And Mr. Trump, having the personality that he has, some would say personality disorder that he has, just cannot allow that a foreign government might have influenced an election that he won, because he feels like it invalidates him. But rather than get into the details here of what they're saying back and forth, again, I encourage you to look at the original documents and just read who, what, where, and when. I'd like to talk about Mr. Trump himself actually today. And so the first thing I wanted to breach the topic was, it was interesting to me. So I'm in full admission here, open discussion and so on. I did not vote for Mr. Trump. I don't appreciate his personality, and I feel like he is inappropriate for the office. Now, don't leave me, because even having said that, again, we all have to have these conversations, right? To come together to overcome our differences and come to some kind of reasonable place to go forward together. because it just doesn't make sense for us to be warring over these issues. We can have differences in opinion, and then we should talk about how they are affecting our lives, and then try to step by step come together on what is a good middle ground. And so with Mr. Trump, he is, so let me talk about this one aspect. So I'm hoping you're familiar with this term, a confidence man. And just in case you aren't, or in case you're not quite sure, a confidence man is a person who has the capability of speaking about topics in which, quite frankly, he is just expresses unbelievable confidence in his own ability or the topic itself. There's not the slightest hint of doubt or self-doubt. And most of us are unable to do that unless we're really confident about the material that we're talking about. So, for example, if we're a subject matter expert on brain surgery or something, and then you would feel very confident about standing in front of an audience and talking about brain surgery and and pros and cons of some of the procedures, different theories on how to do brain surgery better, these kinds of things. You would feel great about that, and therefore you would project confidence. And that's a legitimate confidence because, you have that expertise. But the confidence man is different in that they project that confidence even when they have no clue what they're talking about, or even worse, they do understand what they're talking about and they're actually lying, purposefully being deceitful. And this is one of the things that Mr. Trump does on a regular basis. In fact, he is, and I would argue, this is not opinion, this is fact. He is a confidence man. And regardless of, there's all kinds of issues that you've read about in the news over time, and you have decided, whether you do or do not like him well enough, or do not like what he's doing well enough to compensate for maybe perhaps some misgivings you have about his personality. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But the truth is, the fact is, at least as far as I can tell, he is a bona fide confidence man, and he's very prolific in his ability to deceive because of his really spectacular capability as far as projecting that confidence when the information that he's providing is deceitful or just flat wrong, or he's ignorant actually of the issues, but he doesn't care. He's just going to go forward and project that confidence. And he said himself many times, I've never been wrong. I will never admit I'm wrong because I'm never wrong. Well, folks, hopefully any of you out there recognize that we're humans and we're wrong. Okay, this is a fairly common event in our lives, with the interactions we have with other people, misunderstandings over communication. We're wrong. And, to go through your life unable to admit that you're ever wrong, unable to even conceive that you're ever wrong. This is all part of the same basic package of the confidence man. And, so I find that this particular attribute of his is, in my view, it's overwhelmingly negative and overcomes perhaps some of the positive things that people would perceive that he's doing. So in those regards, and that balance between is he likable or not, and I completely agree that a person doesn't need to be likable to be a great leader. In fact, it's very often the case that a great leader is not very well liked. That these things are true. But I wonder, so I'll tell you a little bit of an anecdotal story. So before the election in 2016, there weren't too many people in my place of employment back in the day that really were talking about that they would perhaps potentially vote for Mr. Trump. But after he was elected, several people that had voted for him actually kind of offered that. They were kind of proactively saying, yes, I voted for him. And some of these people actually surprised me. I didn't suspect that some of these people would have voted for him. It just didn't seem like their normal personalities and their normal belief systems would align with voting for Mr. Trump. And one of the very first people that talked about this with me, he said, "Oh, yeah, I voted for Mr. Trump," and I guess I don't hide things very well with my face, so I was like, "Oh, wow!" So I'm surprised, and the first words out of his mouth was, "I think he's a piece of crap as a person, but I think he's going to do great things, in regard to some of these, like reducing government bureaucracy and, cutting taxes and addressing the what I consider a big issue around abortion." So these are the big three typical things that people who support Mr. Trump, that's why they support him. But he said, yeah, he's really a terrible person and truly a steaming turd. And so I noted this. It was like, wow, so this person just really thinks of him very badly, but because of the what he perceives to be the future positives of his administration, he went ahead and voted for him. And then, to make a long story short, over the next 18 months, had similar conversations. Again, I never asked. I wasn't out polling. People would just kind of bring this up. So this was in south central Minnesota, western Wisconsin, and in areas down in southeastern Texas. Over an 18-month period, people would just kind of volunteer that they were supporting Mr. Trump and, the reasons why. And typically it was abortion or taxes or bureaucracy, cutting bureaucracy, the perception of that. And but what amazed me was that in all, I kind of kept an informal tally, and 15 people talked to me about Mr. Trump, just volunteered to talk to me about Mr. Trump. But and 13 out of those 15, so it's like well over 80%, like 85% of the people that were Trump supporters, they referred to Mr. Trump as like he's really a crappy person, he's a turd, he's a steaming pile. I mean, this was their words, volunteered by them. And I wonder, when he was elected, that kind of gave people that had voted for him kind of this reinforcement that it wasn't a mistake because, he had been elected. So obviously enough people agreed with them to actually elect the man into the office. But I wonder if they also understood that about 85% of his supporters think that he's a horrible person, a steaming turd. And if they were to acknowledge that or think about that, would they still support him as much as they do? Reinforcing that aspect of it. So I am not I'm again, I just in open disclosure here, I'm not a big fan of Mr. Trump, and in fact, I'd like to see him leave the office of president because, again, I think he's a confidence man, and I think he's got about 40% of the country, bamboozled, if you will. That's an old term. I don't know if how many people will recognize it these days, but so what I want to do is I put together a short speech, basically, and I'm just going to read it off because I took a lot of time to write it. So Donald Trump is a prolific confidence man who, according to polls, continues to successfully deceive about 40% of the American public. He's deceiving you. If you're with all of this confidence and boastful stuff, but a lot of it is false, then he's deceiving. And I'm unfortunately, there's about 4 out of 10 of you that are being deceived by this fellow, and someday, it's my prediction that you're going to realize that the snake oil man is selling you snake oil, and you're going to be quite angry that he's done this. He is aided by a few media outlets, including Fox News, which is one of the most popular channels for news these days on television, and with the backing of misinformation channels, the ability to rant via Twitter, and the goodwill benefits of a relatively strong economy, Mr. Trump will be difficult to defeat in November of 2020. The 2020 election, in my view, is not about a candidate winning that is opposed to Donald Trump. It is about making absolutely sure that the great deceiver himself, Mr. Trump, and his crony system that he's accrued and that supports him is defeated. And this must be a singular mandate and the strategy of the 60% of us that are not deceived by his confidence man facade. We don't need a candidate opposing Donald Trump on the ballot so they can push their own platform. We need a super candidate offering a super platform. So who's the super candidate? Well, he's very comfortable speaking freely in front of any audience without teleprompter or notes. He's perceived as empathetic to the public and has at least a modest sense of humor. Minimum skeletons in the closet regarding past commitments, comments, actions, and voting records. Perceived as fair-minded and open to opposing views, a moderate versus liberal or socialist. Does not accept funding from rich donors, industry, or lobbyists. Probably a man, although could be an exceptional woman. That's just a statement of it seems like that would be the most likely to be elected. Comes from one of the swing states in the Midwest and has some previous leadership experience in government service, as in government office and or military service. What is the ideal platform? Okay. Well, it's not free college, and it's not, spend and tax. So proposes to remake the election process to eliminate the influence of political parties and big money, and implements new secure online candidacy and election system. Candidate makes appearances on Fox News whenever possible because you've got to reach a lot of the followers of Mr. Trump watch Fox News, and you need to talk to them to share and to breach the abyss of communication. Emphasize job creation via environmental and superstructure programs, especially focused in poorer areas. Some of these rural areas and poorer areas that people are still struggling. Emphasizes campaigning in swing states, rural areas, and conservative strongholds, again, to overcome the breach of communication with people that feel like they've been left behind. Emphasize better wages by mandating a change in corporate goals. So today, corporate goals are number one, the customer, which has to be, and number two is the shareholder, which ultimately, yes, all employees can have a few hundred shares, probably, sometimes, maybe 10, 15, 30% of them do. But the big shareholders are the senior executives who are making all the money already. So, no, the number two goal for every corporation should be employee satisfaction, which of course would include some wage increases and benefit increases. Emphasizes affordable health care by revealing the contributors to healthcare costs and regulating elements driving those higher costs. A national low-cost basic coverage with optional policies. So kind of the safety net plus optional policies above that. Emphasizes balancing the federal budget via careful reduction in spending. For example, in the military, you could cut cutting-edge technology and buy base military equipment that can be upgraded with technology later. Supports availability of safe, legal, and affordable abortions, but only under very limited circumstances. Part of a comprehensive pregnancy care program. So I talked about this in previous shows. We're not very good in this country, actually, in prenatal pregnancy and postnatal or post-pregnancy care. So we could do a lot better job all through that and achieve the goals that many have, where the number of abortions would be greatly reduced, but also achieve the goal that many people have, which is to give women a whole lot more support because they have this singular thing that only they are burdened with, basically. Support reducing the cost of colleges by changing lending practices and government subsidies earned, and offering government subsidies which would be earned for good grades in fields important to the future, like technology and medicine. And just to make sure I'm clear on that, for example, we probably don't need, history majors are great, but we don't need many of them, and we don't need to send a bunch of people to school for free to get history degrees. It's not going to help us that much going into the future. Supports gun ownership, but targets mass shootings through public education, mental health screening, gun safety training, and reduction in notoriety of perpetrators. So one of the things that's going on here is we're getting this kind of copycat effect, because the people who do this become so famous, it's triggering something, some kind of mental issue in other potential people that would do this. It emphasizes the deceit of Donald Trump and labels him accurately as a prolific and long-standing confidence man. So we just talked about that earlier in the show. Emphasizes the degrading mental condition of Mr. Trump via showing video montages. So it's commonly known, and the 60% of us that appreciate that Mr. Trump is a confidence man and don't appreciate him being in the office of president, it's commonly known his longtime friends and associates, many of them have said he is only a shell of what he once was mentally. Number 13 on the list here emphasizes global dependence upon each other and the need to reverse global population growth and and environmental degradation via unified United Nations efforts. So we've got to work together. This is a big planet, but we're all on the same one. And there's 7 times the number of people that there were just 200 years ago. And if you, just to emphasize, what that is, just imagine in your house or your apartment or your condo or wherever it is that you live, if there were 3, suddenly there's 21. If there were 4, suddenly there's 28. Just imagine the effect of on the environment in your home if there were 7 times the number of humans suddenly in there. And that's basically what we've done. 7 times the number of people in 200 years. That's unbelievably fast growth of population, and we're definitely affecting the environment. And then last but not least, and I'm sure there'd be others, but these are the 14 points I came up with. Number 14 emphasizes support for Jewish people everywhere, seeks a new Middle East peace plan to try to approach this in a different way, to try to, again, wholly, completely support the Jewish people and the reason why the state of Israel was created after World War II, because of the horrors of the Holocaust. In no way forgetting that or any of the other horrors that have gone on, and but try to approach this in a new way. And one of those potential new ways is to have protected religious safe zones. So basically say there are certain areas of this planet, because of their importance to various religions around the world, that don't belong to anyone. Or they belong to all of us and no one. And that would be safety and governance maintained by, again, United Nations team. Well, I've gone over the normal time for the show, solidly 25 minutes here. But anyway, this is the Pro and Con show for Thursday, May 30th, 2019. My name is Michael James Ott. I hope the show has caused you to think about things in a little bit different way, a little bit better way, I hope. And until tomorrow, bye for now.